From CGTN headquarters in Beijing, this is The Hub with Wang Guan.
Hello and welcome to The Hub. I'm Wang Guan in Beijing. The streets of Los Angeles in the United States have become a battleground, not just of protest, but according to many experts, of American constitutional principle. On June the 9th, up to 700 Marines were mobilized to Los Angeles from Washington, D.C., aiding the over 2,000 National Guard troops deployed by the federal government to California without the state's consent. The first such unilateral action since 1965. This came on the heel of immigration raids targeting Latino communities, triggering unrest marked by tear gas, rubber bullets, and attacks on journalists. What is fueling this rupture in the American political fabric? And how does this latest clash expose deeper fractures in the United States domestic and democratic institutions? Now, to unpack all these questions and more, I'm joined in Shanghai by Josef Mahoney, Professor of Politics and International Relations at East China Normal University. In Beijing, we have Andy Mok, Senior Research Fellow at the Center for China and Globalization. And here in our Beijing studio, we have John Gong, Professor of Economics at the University of International Business and Economics. Professor John Gong, let me start with you. We've seen unannounced raids against the Latino Americans, thousands of them, and then a chaotic scene of protests and demonstrations which turned violent or even more violent by the crackdown, suppression, firing of rubber bullets, tear gas, the mobilization of federal forces, the first such intervention since 60 years ago. What lies at the heart of this round of unrest?
Well, I guess the fundamental issue is Trump's mass deportation program. He is targeting immigrants, communities around the country, and Los Angeles being what's described as a sanctuary city. It's a very large Latino population. Granted that some of them are indeed illegal immigrants, but the way they actually approach these communities certainly raise eyebrows among these communities. It started out at that Home Depot in Paramount, which is a community of Latino Americans. And I think it has gone to this stage totally unnecessarily. According to California Governor Gavin Newsom, President Trump is calling the National Guards, which is the decision itself is questionable in the first place. And now he's sending U.S. Marine Corps. The first Marine Corps. I mean, this is the second battalion of the first Marine Corps. This is the best American Marine Corps units, right? It fought with our soldiers in the Korean War. So why would we do this, American people? I mean, this is just totally unnecessary in my view.
And I assume there are tens of millions of undocumented immigrants in the United States. Until I left in the 2019-2020, there were tens of millions of them, and California was singled out and picked out for this round of assault. Why California?
Well, predominantly, California is a democratic state. The population there is very sympathetic to the immigrants, including illegal immigrants. And also, I would argue that even illegal immigrants is an indispensable part of the U.S. economy, especially in the South, in agricultural sectors and other fields. I mean, if you live in places like Southern California, Southern Texas,
you can't go by a day without speaking
exactly.
Spanish, right?
Yeah,
or hearing Spanish being spoken.
Absolutely. You fly into LAX and rent a car, turn on the radio. Half of the radio stations are in Spanish, right? So I think the Southern California economy is very much dependent upon illegal immigrant labor as well. So I think this is it's an issue that has to be resolved sort of more peacefully, more politically. But unfortunately, President Trump decides to use this brute force and mobilizing U.S. military to target people. And this is unheard of.
Joseph, in Shanghai, let me turn to you. Let's deal with some facts. On June the 9th, up to 700 Marine Corps members of them were deployed to Los Angeles. That's on top of 2,000 National Guards already deployed to Los Angeles. The state governor of California, Gavin Newsom, said he would sue the Trump administration over that decision because he didn't ask for it. But the border czar and former U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement Director Tom Homan threatened to arrest Gavin Newsom. Donald Trump even was thrilled about it, saying it was great. It was a great idea to arrest Gavin Newsom. So with tensions escalating and the political divide deepening, where do you see the situation on the ground developing?
Well, first, let's point out that I think, as you noted, this sort of call-up and deployment hasn't happened without a governor's consent since 1965. And let's be clear, that was to enforce the civil rights legislation in Selma to protect African Americans. So I think some people will find it a little bit ironic that we now have minorities being targeted by this type of call-up in 2025. Clearly this is in part being driven by the fact that 54% of Americans seem to approve of Trump's deportation program. They may have some quibbles with some of the excesses, but this is the one bright spot, unfortunately, in his policymaking. Overall, his approval ratings are very low. And the White House is projecting that by doubling the National Guard and even deploying the Marines, they'll see those approval numbers continue to go up. Now, in the case of California, we know that Republicans have been demonizing California and LA in particular as part of their culture war, as part of their political conflict for some time. A big part of Trump's base, of course, is ready to stand against what they see as the fundamental corruption of Los Angeles, not just related to immigrants, but a host of morality issues. And clearly, he's targeting Governor Newsom as much as Newsom is expected to be a future presidential contender and someone who would be definitely a threat to Trump's agenda should he become a lame duck after the midterms, or should Trump's appointed successor have to face Newsom in the next presidential election.
Yeah, exactly. It is ironic if you think about it that 60 years ago, the Marine Corps was deployed to crack down on the African Americans, the Black Americans, and now on Latino Americans.
No, they were deployed to protect the African Americans.
Protecting the African Americans, excuse me.
The racists in Alabama.
Yes, yes. And now, issues of a minority, people of color, so-called by the immigration
being targeted,
immigration officers, though I'm never a big fan of that word. I don't think people should be categorized that way. Andy, let me turn to you. On June the 8th, President Donald Trump deployed National Guard troops to Los Angeles without a formal request from Governor Gavin Newsom. The first such move, of course, since 1965. Newsom called it purposefully inflammatory. In your view, how does this action challenge the constitutional principle of federalism?
Well, thanks for having me on today, Wang Guan. So let me first talk about this from a narrow tactical perspective, and then from a larger strategic perspective, and what is the Trump administration hoping to accomplish beyond just this issue around what they see as enforcing the laws of the nation. So I think I'm probably having a somewhat different perspective than our other two guests in that from the Trump administration's perspective, they are doing exactly what they were elected to do, first of all. And he is on sound historic precedent and well within his legal authority to do this, because the National Guard, which is different from the Marines, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, actually has a dual reporting structure to the governor of the particular state, as well as to the president, if the president does invoke Title X, which he has done here. So I've done a fair amount of research into this before our discussion today, and I don't think there's any real question that the president lacks the legal authority to do this. And I think this would be the fifth time, the first for immigration purposes. But the other instances, Eisenhower, Kennedy, and Lyndon B. Johnson, were all for civil rights reasons. So I think that from a federalism perspective, this is certainly, it can be debated, should he do this? But I think legally speaking, he's on solid ground here. Now, I think the more interesting question, Wang Guan, is that what is this doing for federalism as a concept more broadly? And I think if we look a little deeper, Trump's Department of Justice, I think, has been laying the groundwork to charge elected officials in California, perhaps even including Governor Newsom, for obstruction of justice, or at least an accessory to obstruction of justice, for interfering with the carrying out of federal laws. And why is he doing this? Again, from the Trumpian perspective or the MAGA perspective, without the ability to defend your borders, you can't be sovereign. And I think the Trump administration clearly believes that deep structural reform in the United States is urgent and critical. So whether that's the reform of the federal bureaucracy, which is being attempted through DOGE, whether it's what they see, again, as the out-of-control academic complex is best represented by Harvard University. And of course, the immigration problem, and I think as the Trump administration might define it, the insurrection taking place in California all requires urgent action. Now, of course, there are many people that would violently, or I would say very strongly, maybe not violently, but very strongly disagree with what he is doing. But again, I think from a narrow perspective, well within the bounds of what Americans would define as federalism, but more strategically, I think the Trump administration clearly is looking to centralize and deepen power, which of course would violate the traditional notion of federalism in the United States.
Yeah. It's interesting you brought up DOGE. We don't know if and when DOGE will run out of steam, given the fallout between Elon Musk and Donald Trump. Professor Gong, you want to add something?
Well, I'm not sure his invocation of the Title X authority is on solid legal grounds. I think it's certainly debatable. For one thing is that this authority stems from the need to deal with an insurrection. And I think what's happening in Los Angeles, at least at the beginning, is not an insurrection, it's a peaceful demonstration. It sort of evolved to this stage actually with the National Guard sent into the place, and now Marine Corps sent into the place. And second thing is that this is at the expressed opposition of the state of California, Mr. Governor Newsom, right, in a place where the governor has full authority. So, I think this idea of federalizing the use of the National Guards and the Marine Corps, the National Guards, and sending the National Guards in this place, invoking Title X authority, I think is very questionable. And I'm not sure it's on solid legal ground. I'm afraid I disagree on this.
John,
Andy.
if I may.
Sure. Go ahead,
so I think we can, of course, disagree on the wisdom of these policies. But I think if you look at the laws surrounding the National Guard, the president does have the legal authority to do this. Now, of course, it can be challenged by the courts, which is exactly what Governor Newsom is doing. But here, again, we never know how judicial proceedings may turn out. But there is strong historical evidence to show that the courts traditionally have given a lot of deference to the president in deeming the exercise of executive authority around precisely these kinds of issues. But what I think is very, very interesting to pay attention to is the Adjutant General, who is the head of the California National Guard, which also happens to be the largest National Guard in the United States, and we can think of it as a kind of a blue state army. He was appointed by Governor Newsom in 2023, and legally he is required, if the president does invoke his authority here, to be commander-in-chief or to take over the command of the National Guard. He's legally required to follow the directives of the president. But this, of course, puts him in a very delicate, perhaps even untenable political position, because presumably this period of time is going to end and he's still going to be the Adjutant General of the National Guard of California. So I think it'll be interesting to see how he manages this very, very difficult political dilemma. And also, I think we also need to point out here that the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, is a very, very different SecDef from the ones in previous administrations, including the first Trump administration, and that he clearly is a big believer in the importance of enforcing immigration policy as the Trump administration sees it. And he also has National Guard experience as well. So the only question mark is the National Guard Bureau, who's currently headed by a Biden appointee. So I think, we can keep an eye here on how the personnel aspect of this plays out. And I wouldn't be surprised if President Trump is expecting or demanding daily briefings from the Adjutant General, which of course would be violating the normal chain of command. But we know that Trump is a norm breaker in other areas, may because of, I think, what is seen as the enormous political significance here. Again, be doing things that we may be reading about in the next few weeks.
Yeah. Let me turn to Joseph. Joseph, what do you think of the constitutional legality when it comes to Trump's decision to deploy National Guards and the Marine Corps to California without their asking for it?
Well, let me say that I think that Andy is substantially right, but here's where I think the argument breaks down. What he did was invoke a statute in a very sort of unique way. He didn't apply geographic limitations, which is being considered a dangerous abuse of power. And generally, you really are only supposed to do this when there's a breakdown in local law enforcement and local courts. Now, the problem that triggered this is that we saw ICE raids, as has been reported by California, ICE raids that were being conducted in highly provocative ways in very sensitive areas without coordinating with local law enforcement. And this is what created the spark for this type of unrest. And what many people suspect is that Trump wanted to provoke this type of situation so that he could then exploit it. Now, he stopped short of declaring it a rebellion. He hasn't yet moved towards the Insurrection Act, and he's still staying within, I think, the legal confines of posse comitatus. And on this point, I agree with Andy, but I think Trump has deliberately provoked this because I think he wants to test the resolve of the American people. He wants to test the resolve of the U.S. military. And I would add that I think he wants to do this in part because we've just seen this new $1 trillion U.S. defense bill, which anticipates deploying U.S. forces much more fully within the United States itself. So it raises some very interesting questions about where he wants to go and the precedences that he's trying to establish.
But Joseph, isn't there a double standard here? Talking about insurrection of, or rebellion against state power or, institutional legacies. Aren't Trump himself and the MAGA movement culpable in that regard? If you think about January 2021, when about 2,000 protesters and or mobs stormed the U.S. Capitol, the power center of the United States. And Trump, it took Trump something like 187 minutes to even respond to that, to put out a tweet asking them to think twice.
I think we have to recall that he's been impeached twice, that he's been accused of trying to overturn a lawful election, that he was facing numerous legal cases, including those related to national security, but also related to his business practices. So I think that the key point is, American politics has sort of reached this strange sort of post-morality point in terms of its overall perspective. It's really sort of a it's going. People. There are these double standards, but everyone is applying double standards to each other. So it's very difficult, I think, for anyone to assert any sort of moral high ground here, except to whoever you're completely in bed with politically. So yes, you're right, but that's the new norm of American politics.
Yeah. Well, we've seen double standards everywhere. I mean, on one hand, there's a heavy reliance on the immigrants who make up the chunk of the service industry, the agricultural industry, and the social fabric, the cultural fabric of the American society these days. By that I mean the Latino Americans. But on the other hand, or have a set of data here, 34% of California's workforce and 27% of GDP come from immigrants. What do you make of this disconnect between American society's dependence on them and now the increasingly aggressive law enforcement actions?
Well, unfortunately, I think Joseph is right that President Trump indeed was elected very much on his stance against immigration, against illegal immigration, but even though Trump did it in a very sinister way. I mean, he says things very of like a racial discrimination in nature. He said, these immigrants are poisoning American blood, for example, and he says that the illegal immigrants from Mexico are either rapists and drug dealers. I think this is very deplorable. Nevertheless, American people really seem to be behind him rooting out these immigration, even including some immigrant communities, out of the concern of competition for jobs, right? But I still, would argue that there is a issue of humanity here, issue of morality here. I mean, even if you're rounding up illegal immigrants, you have to do this in a humane and dignified way. I mean, the whole argument about what's happening in Los Angeles is not so much about this you call it insurrection or not. At least this right is not right. I think there's no argument about this. I think the issue is about why it happened and how it happened, and is there a necessary reason why this is happening? I think this is what Governor Newsom's stance is. It's totally unnecessary, and at this stage, you shouldn't be adding more fuel to the fire by calling in the Marine Corps, right? So I think this is the issue. I think the whole debate is about that. It's not so much about whether illegal immigrants should be allowed or not. Of course, you should go by the law, and the law says that immigration has to be going through a certain legal procedure.
Andy, if you think about the track record for the past 5 months since Trump 2.0, the suspension of visas targeting certain countries, the suspension of international students' enrollment to Harvard University, although that piece of decision was largely overturned or debated by local courts, and now law enforcement measures, unprecedented measures targeting Latino Americans. What is the broader implication here? What is what are these actions indicating about what are the days and months to follow?
Yeah, I think this is, of course, occupying the time and the energies of pretty much everyone around the world, given the impact these policies can have. And I think that, Wang Guan, honestly, it's hard to say. I mean, I think, again, to engage in a bit of strategic empathy here, right? That with the Trump administration, they see an America that is in dire straits, right? So the federal debt is unsustainable. There are immigration problems. And, it's not, to call them Latin Americans, might be a little bit of a distortion because, the focus is on illegal immigrants. And my understanding, I think Joseph makes a very good point, that the federal authorities, ICE, did not have the cooperation of the municipal government in Paramount. But the reason is because Paramount has declared itself a sanctuary city, which means they will not cooperate with federal authorities on immigration issues. So, I think, again, the motivations, to me, make sense. That I think it's widely acknowledged the U.S. faces severe, if not existential, problems across a number of axes or vectors, and something needs to be done. I think that most people would agree that the implementation, certainly, of many of Trump's policies have left something to be desired. Certainly, as someone who wants to see friendly, productive, and mutually respectful relations between the U.S. and China, I think certainly the Trump administration has made some misguided and self-destructive moves. But again, it seems that things are moving in the right direction. And, we, I think, should do our best to be optimistic. But with this particular situation with illegal immigrants, I think, again, the way I look at it is that the administration is looking very much to extend greater executive branch control over issues it deems is very important. And again, to go back to your original point, this will be at the expense of this notion of federalism in the United States.
Yes, that is true. And it's also true that there are political considerations at stake. Joseph, while 19 Republican governors backed the federal intervention, more than 20 Democratic governors condemned it as abuse of power. California legislators, for example, have even proposed measures to prevent the federalization, what they call the federalization of the National Guard. Do you see this as part of a growing bipartisan divide? What are the broader ramifications here?
Well, again, Andy's right about Paramount, but Trump didn't even coordinate with the state government. So there's the main issue. But I think, what we see in this case is that it offers Trump really his best case to see if he can exercise authority over sanctuary cities or sanctuary states or blue states. And here, I think in part he's picked the biggest state, just as he picked China to target, especially in his trade war, just as he picked Harvard in his war on higher education. He's targeting a city and a region that's largely reviled among his base. He's targeting again a governor who's his political opposite and a future contender for the presidency. Meanwhile, he can also go ahead and test the limits of constitutional authority, test the resolve of the military, test the political support of the American people, and do this while distracting everyone from everything else that's happening, including his missteps in the global trade war, the continued apartheid and genocide in Gaza, the massive defense budget, the so-called Big Beautiful Bill that many feel is going to ruin the national economy, the fact that we've seen a contraction in the national economy attributable to some of his policies, his feud with Musk, and so on. So, once again, he's done something very, very provocative that will allow him to take a step forward on some fronts, while also distracting people from other failures by also at the same time targeting a minority group. And in this, I think he's absolutely repulsive.
Professor John Gong, some analysts argue that the current unrest and state-federal friction indicate the U.S. may be approaching a constitutional breaking point or even a kind of quote-unquote cold civil war. Do you look that way?
Well, the notion of cold civil war, thank goodness, is still cold. I think this notion has been proposed for quite many years. I think today's American political landscape is indeed very polarized. You have these, staunch Republicans, red states versus the blue states, Democrat strongholds. But I still very much believe in the resilience of the American institutions that it can be able to deal with these problems, even though there's wide accusation that the Trump administration is more and more moving towards authoritarian regime. As a matter of fact, California Governor Newsom already said that this is a movement towards authoritarianism. I think I still have faith that the American people would eventually speak out and make a historic correction if they see the country is moving towards the wrong direction.
Now, first Harvard, and then China, and then Gavin Newsom's California. What could happen next? Very quickly, Professor John Gong.
I think. I don't know. I think he has a range of agendas. Maybe on. I don't know. I don't have anything off the top of my head, but I think President Trump is very much on target, following what's actually indeed in that Project 2025. The immigration issue is certainly one of them. It's clear, looking back, that he's indeed doing that, even though he denies that he has anything to do with Project 2025. But as a matter of fact, everything he does is related to that playbook.
Well, we'll keep that in mind, and sorry to put you on the spot. Thank you, gentlemen, all of you, very much for joining us, and thank you for watching, and stay tuned as our programs continue on CGTN. Bye and take care.